Hello, everybody. We're going to start very soon. Thank you so much for your attention. Dear fellow members of the Spanish Economic Association, I am honored to address you today at our annual conference as President of the Spanish Economic Association. It is great to see that year after year, the symposium serves as a meeting point for all of us, a great community of researchers, professors, and students who strive to push the frontier research in economics and the quality of teaching in Spain and beyond. Serving this community over these years has been a great honor and a true pleasure. Needless to say, I have not been alone. Our association works thanks to the generosity of a large group of economists who devote much of their valuable time to making the association happen. This includes members of the association who regularly participate in our activities, as well as members of the governing bodies, committees, and the journal. A big thank you to all of you. In particular, I would like to thank the organizing committee of the symposium, chaired by Emma Moreno, who, as you can see, is doing an amazing job, as well as the scientific committee, chaired by Mónica Martinez Bravo, and all its members who have done a hard and a high-quality work. Thanks to all of them, thanks to all of you, we gather here today waiting to listen to more than 220 speakers in the 71 parallel sessions, 4 keynote sessions, and 2 new lunch sessions that we have organized. Moreover, as you can see, the venue is absolutely magnificent. I don't want to review all the activities that the association has organized during the last year. For that matter, I invite you to visit our brand new web pages that contain all the information about the activities that we have organized and which we really hope that you find helpful. Nevertheless, I would like to highlight 2 important issues. First, as you know, Spain has just revised the requirements for assessing the research activity. These requirements will shape our incentives, particularly so for the younger scholars, ultimately affecting the quality of economic research in our country. At the association, we believe that quality should have been rewarded over quantity. And furthermore, we are particularly concerned about the inadequacy of the current rules to discourage publications in so-called predatory journals. We therefore invite our community to avoid relying on these journals above and beyond what the new rules say. The association has published 2 statements on these 2 matters, which we invite you to visit at our website. Second, for the first time, the association has conducted an online survey among members to assess the professional environment in our profession in Spain. The results will be released today at a lunch session just after lunch, which I encourage you to attend. And I hope that by learning from the results of this survey that we hope to repeat every year, we will make our profession a better place to be in. Before I pass the word to Emma, let me return attention to the prizes that the association gives annually to recognize the best trabajos fin de grado, that is the best undergraduate thesis. We received 37 theses. Among the 37 theses, the committee has selected the 3rd best of them. 2 of the winners are here today. Please, Julia Martin, come and get your diploma for your TFG entitled Analyzing Green Gentrification in Madrid through a Geographic Regression Discontinuity Design. Congratulations. Luis Antonio Pérez Padau from the Universidad Valencia has won the prize for his TFG entitled Impuesto al carbono y cambio climático en la transición de Europa hacia las 0 emisiones netas. Alberto Orts has also won the prize for his TFG entitled Perspectivas de la relación riesgo-rendimiento de modelos de valoración de activos con carteras predefinidas. During the lunch sessions, they will be presenting posters on their work, and I invite you to go and check the high quality of their master thesis. Beyond the TFGs, another activity we are particularly proud of is the PhD school. This year, we have had 24 students that have gathered and learned about the topic match employer-employee data. The school has also discussed important guidelines on the academic job market and the new teaching practices. I would like to give a special thanks to the Education Committee that year after year keeps organizing this very successful activity. Next, I will give the word to Emma Moreno, chair of the local committee, who will provide us with some local information and last-minute changes. I would like to thank you once more for being here, for your invaluable contributions to the field of economics and our association, and I wish you a productive and highly interactive symposium.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. As a member of the local committee, I would like to thank the Spanish Economic Association for the opportunity of organizing this conference in Salamanca. Also, I thank the Fundación of this university, our department, the students, and all the colleagues who have participated in making this possible. Let me tell you that we have worked with a hope that you all feel at home. I can't resist the temptation to project part of an email that we received from Hostrom some time ago. He wrote, he wrote that Salamanca was on his bucket list. You can read it. So, I can only say, please, enjoy this conference, enjoy the symposium, the University of Salamanca, the social events, and the good company you may find here and around. It is a pleasure to welcome each one of you. Thanks a lot for coming.
Hello, I'm Vicente Cuñat. I'm the exiting president, past president of the association. Oopsie. And I'm afraid there comes a time in the life of any researcher where you need to wear glasses. And that time has come for me this year. Welcome to the Spanish Economic Association's presidential address. It's an honor for me to present Professor Natalia Fabra. Natalia holds a PhD in economics from the European Institute. Her thesis was focused on market power in electricity markets. She's also full professor, she's currently full professor of economics at the Universidad Carlos III, director of the Energy Eco Lab, research fellow at Toulouse School of Economics, CENFI, University of Cambridge, and CPR. As you know, she's the current president of the Spanish Economic Association, as well as being president of the European Association for Research in Industrial Economics, EARI, and the board member of ENAGAS, Natalia no paras. That's it. But let's talk about research. Natalia's research is based on industrial organization, energy and environmental economics, as well as regulation and competition. If I had to characterize her research, I would say that it's deep and innovative, but also extremely relevant. Her work is extensively published in the journals that we think are the leading ones, but also Natalia significantly influences policy, industrial practices through her research, and also through her direct engagement. So many of us strive for relevance. We do our research and we say, okay, what do I contribute to the world? So Natalia's research and engagement deals with reshaping complex wholesale markets, bringing competitions to energy markets in general, improving households' welfare and inequality, and saving the planet through carbon taxes. So for now, not bad. I would think that's quite a lot of relevance. And not surprisingly, Natalia has received various awards: the Sabadell Banco Herrero Prize for Best Spanish Economist, the ERC Consolidator Grant, among others. Finally, I would like to say that, from my interaction with Natalia within the association, it's obvious to me that she has a profound dedication and enthusiasm for economics, and the same energy and insight that she has for her research, she applies manifest in the effort to make the profession better and nicer. So it's been a pleasure to collaborate with you, Natalia. Today, Natalia is going to speak about unpacking the distributional effects of the energy crisis. I think it's another example of a very current, very relevant, and complex topic that I'm sure Natalia will help unpack, as the title says, in a very interesting way. So in your own time, Natalia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Vicente, for your introduction. You probably understand why we have enjoyed working together at the association with Vicente, and for sure, we are going to miss you a lot. Thank you so much. I'm going to be presenting some recent research that I have prepared for this presidential address on the distributional effects of the energy crisis. So let me start with a bit of a background, showing you what started to happen in Europe by the spring of 2021. What you can see here is the state of the gas storage facilities in Europe over time. The pink line represents the amount of gas in the EU storage facilities in 2021. Typically, we use gas during the winter, and therefore we use the gas that is stocked in the storage facilities, and we fill them up during the springtime so as to be ready for the next winter. Those dotted lines represent the minimum and the maximum amount of gas historically in the storage facilities, and this is why you see this seasonality. By the spring of 2021, those experts watching the energy markets started to see something weird. By then, by 2021, the amount of gas in the storage facilities suddenly dropped below the historical minimum. What was going on? If we zoom in on the state of the gas storage facilities owned by the Russian giant Gazprom, what started to happen was that Gazprom had decided not to fill up the storage facilities already by the spring of 2021. At the same time, the amount of gas coming from Russia to Europe, which is again the pink line, was also below the historical minimum. This is a classical textbook example of capacity withholding meant to increase prices in the market, and this strategy was successful. Now we know the reason why Russia wanted to withhold gas from the European gas market in order to increase prices. As you see already by May 2021, that is well before the invasion of Ukraine, gas prices started to increase for a historical average of 70 euro megawatt hour to already at 100 right before the invasion took place. Clearly, after the invasion, gas prices kept on increasing up to the record high that took place during the summer of 2022 of something above between 200 and 300 euro per megawatt hour. That is more than a 15-fold increase in gas prices. But I came here to talk not really about gas prices or gas markets, but to talk about electricity markets. What is the relationship between gas and electricity? Probably you have seen this figure by now after the energy crisis many times, but I think it's worth reviewing this together again. What this figure is showing is the supply function of electricity generation. In order to produce electricity, we make use of different technologies, hydro, renewables, nuclear, and gas, that we can order from low to high marginal cost. When we need to match demand and supply, the marginal technology clearly is gas, and therefore gas is the price-setting technology. If gas-fired generation suffers a shock because there's an increase in the gas price, the price offers that gas-fired plants are going to offer in the market also go up, implying that the electricity market price, that all the technologies, including those that do not burn gas, is going to go up. And this is really what we saw in these markets, the increase in the gas price triggered by the Russian attempts to increase gas prices translated into an overall increase in electricity market prices across Europe. So as you can see, these figures showing electricity prices really mimics the evolution of gas prices. Here you cannot see Spain. Why? Because Spain also in this case is different. Electricity market prices in Spain are showed with a red line, and as you can see, whereas Spain was no different up to the summer of 2022, in the summer of 2022, the government put in place the so-called Iberian solution that managed to decouple electricity market prices from gas prices, and therefore, during that time, electricity prices in Spain were much lower than the prices in the rest of Europe. Let me give you a bit more of a detail of what this intervention was, even though I will extend more on this later on. What this intervention really did was to subsidize electricity generation with gas-fired plants. In essence, what it did was to compensate gas producers with the excess of the gas market price above a reference price equal to 40. So whenever gas prices were above 40, which was the case well until the winter of 2023, gas generators would be compensated by the difference. Therefore, this implied that, in essence, they were facing a marginal cost for gas, which was much lower, as if they bought the gas at a price equal to 40 instead of those prices that you saw in the previous figure. They were therefore expected to reduce by the amount of the subsidy the prices that they would offer in the electricity market, which also reduced the prices that the other generators received in the market. I would like to explore, and this is what I have done with this paper, the distributional implications of both the energy crisis as well as the market intervention that took place in the Spanish electricity market. Typically, when we analyze the impact of a shock, we look at the overall effects, but increasingly, we are paying attention to the distributional implications of those effects. There's many reasons for this. You can have your own. One clear reason is that inequality is ramping, so all the shocks that have an adverse distributional implication should be of concern. Furthermore, in the case of energy, in the case of electricity, which is an essential good for which the demand elasticity is not necessarily large, when households suffer a bill shock, clearly this bill shock is not as harmful on the high-income households as it is on the low-income households, for which the bill shock can be particularly harmful because they might be budget constrained or liquidity constrained, and this might imply that, for instance, they might turn on the electric heating less, which might have an implication on their health and make energy poverty particularly worse. This is why I believe that in this context, it's particularly relevant to understand the distributional implications of the crisis as well as the distributional implications of the market intervention that took place. Which type of distributional effects am I going to be looking at? As it is well known, electricity is generated by electricity companies that compete to participate in a wholesale market. Electricity retailers buy electricity from the wholesale market, and then they sell it to the households. Therefore, I'm going to be exploring two types of distributional effects. I'm going to be exploring the distributional effects from or between electricity companies and households. This is going to pertain to what happens in the wholesale electricity market. And also, because these households are different, there's heterogeneity across households, I'm going to be analyzing the distributional implications across households, effects that pertain to the retail market and to the consumption patterns of the households, depending on their income, on their characteristics, as well as on their location. More in detail, when I'll be exploring the wholesale market effects, that is the distributional implications between electricity consumers and firms, I would like to assess two questions. I would like to explore the crisis effects, that is, by how much the energy crisis increased electricity market prices, for which I have to construct a counterfactual, that is, what would have been the wholesale electricity prices in the absence of the crisis. And I would also like to measure the impact of intervention, for which I need to build another counterfactual, which is what would have been wholesale electricity market prices without intervention. With these counterfactuals and the factual scenario, I will be able to compute these distributional effects. When it comes to the distributional effects across households, that is within the electricity market, again, I want to ask the same two questions, but in this case, I need to compute the electricity bills that households would have paid in the absence of the crisis, as well as in the absence of the intervention. And I want to understand, I want to disentangle the mechanisms that underlie the different bill impacts that we find across households. How am I going to do it? First, I'm going to simulate the Spanish wholesale electricity market under various scenarios. First, I'm going to simulate the market with the prevailing market data to construct my factual scenario that I'm going to be comparing with the other scenarios. I'm going to simulate the market as if there had been no intervention in the market, as if the intervention had been implemented at the beginning of the crisis, that is, back to the summer of 2021 rather than the summer of 2022. And I'm going to construct a no-crisis scenario under two types of approaches that I'm going to give me a lower bound and an upper bound. The upper bound is given to the case in which I assume that gas prices in Spain had not increased. The second one is going to take into account that if gas prices in Spain had been lower, also gas prices in other countries would have been lower, which would have implied lower electricity prices in Portugal and France, affecting the trade among the countries. Also, it has been documented that there's a positive correlation between gas prices and coal prices, because the two of them are substitutes. So if gas prices are lower, coal demand is lower, coal prices are lower, and because coal demand is lower and coal is a very polluting energy, the demand for CO2 permits would also have been lower, and therefore CO2 prices would also have been lower. That is, in the absence of the gas prices, not only gas prices would have been lower, but also the prices of these other inputs, as well as the prices of electricity prices elsewhere. This is going to give me a lower bound for the no-crisis scenario. As for the retail market, I need to recompute the electricity bills that households would have paid in the absence of the crisis. I'm not inviting you to go and check your electricity bills. Probably this is not particularly pleasant, but let me remind you that in the electricity bills we are paying many different components, including charges for transmission and distribution and several taxes. And in the bills you have, if you check it, you have one line there which is called Coste de la Energía, that is capturing how much you consume and the prices of the electricity at the time you consume that electricity. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to keep all the components of the bill as they were in practice, and I'm going to replace the Coste de la Energía with the cost that I compute under these various scenarios, so I can have my different electricity bills under the scenarios that I have computed under my simulations for the wholesale electricity market. So let me start with the wholesale market effects, and let me again review some of the expected results from both the crisis as well as from the intervention, going back to the figure that I showed you before with the effect of the increase in gas prices that push the electricity market price up, pushing the price that all the technologies got in the market. What are the distributional effects between consumers and firms from this price increase? Well, consumers are paying a higher price times all their consumption. Part of this increase in the price is devoted to pay the higher cost of the gas-fired plants when they have to buy this gas, which is now more expensive. But another part of this price increase what it does is that it increases the inframarginal rents of the inframarginal producers, hydro, renewables, and nuclear, that get a higher price despite not paying a higher cost. This is a major distributional effect that I'm going to quantify later on. What about the impact of the market intervention? Well, I said before that what the intervention did was really to subsidize gas for electricity generation, and therefore implied that the reduction in the market price was fully offset by the fact that now consumers had to subsidize this electricity generation. And therefore, in net terms, consumers were paying for gas generation the same as before. Now they're paying a lower price, but they have to compensate for the subsidy. The net effect, therefore, is the reduction in the inframarginal rents, as the intervention, what it did was to reduce the market price and therefore reduce the rents of hydro, renewables, and nuclear power generators. Let me give you some more expected results beyond the reduction in the transfer from consumers to electricity producers that were triggered by the intervention. There were some other expected results that we could have thought of when this measure was put in place prior to really quantifying the effects that took place in practice. The first one is that there was no distortions in cost efficiency. Why? Because all the gas plants received the same subsidy regardless of the price they paid for gas and regardless of their efficiency. It is as if the supply function shifted down in a parallel fashion. Therefore, there were no distortions in the cost ranking across the Spanish gas plants. Third, French consumers benefited from the intervention. Why? Because the prices in Iberia, the prices in Spain and Portugal went down, and this enlarged the price differences across the two countries. And for the use of the interconnection facilities between Spain and Portugal, we pay the difference between these two prices, and the French consumers, they keep half of these congestion rents. And therefore, because price differences were wider due to the intervention, the French consumers got half of these wider price differences. There's been quite a lot of detail as to whether the intervention increased exports from Spain to France and whether this implied an increase in emissions. To answer this question, we really need to understand whether the interconnection between the two countries was congested or not. Suppose that the interconnection is not congested. If prices in Spain fall, then this implies that there's going to be an increase in exports from Spain to France. Therefore, we'll have to produce more to satisfy these exports, which is going to imply an increase in emissions in Spain. By the way, this is just a local effect, because if we are producing more in Spain, they're producing less in France, and therefore the only thing that we're doing is moving emissions from France to Spain, but not globally. This is what would have happened if the line had been uncongested. But what about if the line had been congested, that is, full at use capacity? If prices go down in Spain and we were already exporting at full capacity to France, exports could not have increased much more. What was happening during that time? In France, they had a nuclear crisis. They had many outages of the nuclear power reactors, meaning that prices in France were already very high, and therefore probably also in the absence of the intervention, there would have been a lot of exports from Spain to France. So in order to be able to compute this effect properly, we need to understand what would have happened in the absence of the intervention, and this is something that we can check with the simulations. So let me give you some more details about how I do the simulations and what are the effects that I obtain. In order to conduct the simulations, I make use of a rich data set containing detailed information about all the Spanish power plants, including their capacity, their efficiency rates, among others. I take into account the daily prices for the main inputs, which is gas, coal, and CO2. I take into account the hourly availability of renewable energies, taking into account the installed renewable capacity in Spain. And I incorporate all the hour electricity demand values in the Spanish electricity market, and I use all this information for the period of study, which is from the summer of 2021 until the summer of 2023. Once I have all this information, because the market clearing takes place on an hourly basis, I need to replicate that, which means that on an hourly basis, I need to construct my supply function and clear the market, taking into account demand conditions. This is a figure that is coming out from the actual electricity market in Spain. My simulations replicate this for all the almost 90,000 hours of my study, coming from the 2 years times each of the 5 scenarios that I consider. I'm going to now show you the results of these simulations, starting with the comparison between the reality and the factual scenario to see whether my model is doing a good job or not. So the gray line represents the real data, whereas the black line represents my simulated market under the factual scenario. And as you can see, my simulations do, I would say, a pretty good job during most of the time, except for the time when the invariant solution was binding. In particular, my prices are flatter and not as volatile as the actual prices that we saw. So we can think of several reasons for this. One of them could be that firms were not fully passing on the subsidy to the final market price as one would have expected. I have no evidence for that, so I try to find other reasons that could explain why my model is not really mimicking the data as well as it does during the rest of the time period. So for this, let me revisit again, but with a bit of notation, how the market intervention worked. This is the cost of producing 1 unit of electricity in a gas plant that has to buy gas in the market at a price PG, taking into account its efficiency, that is how many units of gas it needs to buy in order to produce 1 unit of electricity, plus the emission cost. What is the subsidy? Well, what the subsidy was really doing was compensating firms for the excess in the market price above the reference price, which was initially set at 40. So that if the market price was equal to 100 and the reference price was 40, the compensation was equal to 60 over the standard efficiency that the government assumed for gas plants, which was set at 55%. If I put the cost minus the subsidy together to compute the net cost of the gas plants, and I rearrange the formula a little bit, what I find is that the gas plants really had a marginal cost equal to the reference price over the standard efficiency, plus a term that would correct for the fact that some plants might have a different efficiency as compared to the standard efficiency assumed by the government. I don't have information on these efficiency rates, so really what I'm assuming is that the efficiency rate is equal to the efficiency rate assumed by the government, which implies that the marginal cost that my simulations are included are flatter because they really represent the 40 euro reference price over the standard efficiency. Am I concerned about this distortion? I am not, otherwise I would not be openly sharing this to you. Why? Because I'll be comparing the scenarios, the factual against the no crisis or the factual against the no intervention scenario, and therefore I expect that this small bias that my simulations have because of this lack of this data are going to cancel out. So I don't think this is an important concern regarding the simulations. Let me show you the results. Again, the black line represents the factual scenario, that is the prices that I simulate for the factual scenario, against the prices that we would have seen if the government had not intervened in the market. So the intervention, what it did, was allowed us to save these price spikes, particularly so during the winter and the fall of 2022. However, the crisis, as you saw before, started much earlier. It really started in the summer of 2021. So what would have happened had the government put in place the invariant solution much earlier? Well, we would have saved the price spikes during 2021. And what about if we had not had the gas crisis? Well, if we hadn't had the gas prices, the two scenarios, the lower and the higher bound that I find for the no crisis scenarios, well, they're even much lower than the prices that we had with intervention of the prices that we would have had with an early intervention. So somehow the market intervention mitigated the price spikes, but it didn't go all the way down to really recovering a no crisis scenario. If we put all the scenarios together, we can really see a ranking between all these cases that we can also summarize in terms of the prices, of the electricity prices in average terms that we would have seen in the market. So in this table, rather than looking at all the numbers, let me, for instance, focus on 2022. The price in the factual scenario, the average price for the year was 163. The price that we would have paid in the absence of the crisis was 238. Therefore, in 2022, the market intervention allowed to reduce electricity prices by 32%. What about the comparison with the no crisis scenario? In the no crisis scenario, prices would have been more in line with the historical average, that is somewhere between 50 and 80 euro per megawatt hour. And therefore, what we can conclude is that even taking into account the intervention, prices during this time were almost twice and 3 times higher than the prices we would have paid in the absence of the gas crisis. How does this translate into the distributional effects across consumers and across firms? Here I have reported, relative to the factual scenario, whether earnings, costs, and profits were different as compared to the factual scenario. And again, let me point your attention to some of the figures. Let's look at profits. The intervention allowed to reduce firms' profits by reducing these inframarginal rents by 14 billion euro. What about the crisis? If we compare the profits that firms would have made in the absence of the crisis, then we can conclude, relative to the factual scenario, that the crisis allowed electricity companies to increase their profits between 26 and 30 billion euro. Let me now move to the retail market to understand how households were affected by the increase in wholesale electricity prices and how these effects differed across households. I'm going to be focusing on a fraction of households, those that are subject to the default rate, which is the so-called PVPC, that is the pricing system by which we pay prices that reflect the prices in the wholesale electricity market. As you know, many of you probably you are not in this regime. Some of the customers, they can choose to be in the free market, under which they pay fixed prices at the prices offered by the electricity companies. I don't know these prices, so all my analysis is going to be based on the assumption that all households are on the real-time price regime. Let me tell you, nevertheless, that the effects that I would expect for the free market are in line with the effects that I'm going to be reporting, because as you can imagine, and I can provide some evidence on this, when the contracts in the free market they were renewed in line with the prices that we were observing in the wholesale electricity market. Which type of data I'm going to be using? Most importantly, I'm going to be relying on a very nice publicly available data sets that reports hourly electricity consumption by households at the zip code level. So I'm going to be working with representative households at the zip code level, for which I know exactly how much they consume every hour of the year. I'm going to recompute the bills that households pay, taking into account all the bill components. Some of these bill components, they are fixed, and therefore when I compare across the scenarios, they cancel out. But some of them are proportional, including taxes, as well as some of the losses electricity losses that we have to pay in our bills and uplift, which are valued at market prices. Therefore, when prices increase, not only we pay more for our consumption, but we also pay more because we have to pay for the losses of the grid at those prices. I also use household income data as well as household size, and I also know some household characteristics, and this is going to be very important, as you will see, because how much electric heating or air conditioning households have is going to be a very important determinant of the distributional effects of these bill increases. Let me first give you the broad numbers reflecting the annual bill changes due to the crisis and due to the intervention. So these are euro per year, and they represent how much more we pay due, for instance, to the crisis. So an average household in Spain, due to the crisis, they paid something between 350 and 450 euro more per year on average. And the intervention allowed to reduce the bills by approximately 100 euro on average. However, as you can see, there's quite a lot of heterogeneity across zip codes in these bill impacts. So for instance, intervention to some households reduce those bills only by 80 euro, whereas for some other representative households in other zip codes, the savings were up to 125. So why is there an heterogeneity across households regarding the bill impacts? What are the main sources of heterogeneity? And I will highlight two sources of heterogeneity. Households consume different amounts of electricity on a yearly basis, and also whatever they consume it at different moments of time. And because electricity prices move across time, depending on when we consume, we are going to be facing different demand-weighted average prices. So what are the main determinants of how much we consume and when we consume electricity? I would highlight four. First, our income is highly related to how much we consume. Also, how many we are in the household is going to affect our electricity needs. But not only. Where we live is extremely relevant because where we live determines the weather conditions, the sunlight, and therefore how much electricity we need in order to heat our homes or in order to cool our homes, and therefore has an impact also on the installed equipment that we have. But our installed equipment not only depends on our location, not only depends on weather conditions, but also on the available infrastructure where we live. If we live in a rural area, maybe in that rural area we don't have a proper gas connection and we need to use more electricity. So all these determinants are decisive to determine how much households consume, and when they consume it, that has an impact on the average market price that they pay. And in this very simple regression, you can indeed see that income is positively correlated with total annual consumption, as well as household size. And as one would expect, the higher the electric heating and the air conditioning share in our zip code, the higher is going to be our electricity consumption. And all these determinants also affect the demand-weighted average price that we find. And what we see, for instance, is that high-income households, not only they consume more, but they also tend to consume more at times when prices are higher. And the same applies for air conditioning and electric heating, which makes us consume more, but also consume more at times when prices are higher. Let me give you a couple of examples. Here, what I'm plotting is the hourly electricity demand of a representative household in two zip codes, one in a zip code in Elche, Alicante, and another one in a zip code in Ponferrada, León. I don't know whether there's anybody in the room from either Elche or Ponferrada, but this is the way average households in these zip codes consume during the day and across the year. And what we can find here is that people in Elche, they tend to consume more than people in Ponferrada. Reassuringly, at night, they consume the same, but they consume much more during the day. So in relative terms, people in Ponferrada, they consume more at night. The same is true if we look at the consumption patterns across the year. In Elche, as it seems, they consume a lot of air conditioning as well as a lot of electric heating, whereas in Ponferrada, probably they use gas in order to heat their homes, and clearly they don't need air conditioning at night. This has an impact on whether the crisis and intervention affected them more or less, because if we looked at how prices change during the day and during the year as an impact of the crisis, what we find is that the effect of the crisis was to increase prices much more during the night and much more during the year, which implies, in this case, that Ponferrada was more negatively affected by the crisis as compared to Elche. So let me go to the distributional implications of this bill increase across households, and let us look at how households across income quantiles were affected by the crisis. Keep in mind that here I have two lines because I'm looking at two different no-crisis scenarios, one lower bound and one upper bound. And what this figure is telling us is per income quantile how much the annual electricity bill increased during the crisis. And what we can see when we look at this exercise in levels is that the electricity bills of the low-income households increase a bit less than the electricity bills of the other income quantiles. Here we see a slight non-monotonicity, but more or less the bills of the second, third, fourth, and fifth quantiles increase fairly the same, on average 350. However, I think it's more meaningful not to look at the results in levels, but to look at the results relative to income, because it's clear that a 350 increase in the bill of a high-income household is not equivalent to a 320 increase bill for the budget of a low-income household. So if we look at these results relative to income, what we find is that clearly the crisis was highly regressive, because relative to income, low-income households suffer a much stronger reduction in their budget, which was around 175%. This is what the increase in the bills represented, not what electricity expenditures represents in terms of their budget, but what the increase in the electricity bills represented in terms of their budget. So I take from this that the energy crisis was highly regressive. What about the intervention? Well, in levels, the intervention implied that the low-income households benefited from a slightly lower savings in their bills. So for the low-income household, the intervention implied a reduction in their annual bills of around 90 euro, which was slightly less than the savings that the other income quantiles got. But again, if we look at this relative to income, what we can see is that relative to income, the low-income quantile was much more benefited by the intervention than the other quantiles. Why do we have this non-monotonicity? Well, I was looking at the data, and if you look at the summary statistics by income quantile, the same determinants that I was highlighting before, what we can see is that there is a non-monotonicity in their consumption, in their sizes, and on the amount of electric heating and air conditioning that they have. And what we find is that the second and the third quantile, they tend to consume more than the other quantiles, probably because they live in areas in the south of Spain, as well as many others, where income happens to be also lower than the average, but they tend to have more electric heating, and also they tend to have more air conditioning. So is this heterogeneity in these patterns what is explaining this non-monotonicity. Indeed, and I apologize for this very large table, but I wanted to highlight the fact that if we control for these determinants, household size, electric heating, air conditioning, and we revisit the impact of the crisis and the impact of intervention on the electricity bills across quantiles, then we recover a fully monotonic relationship, meaning that using the first quantile as a reference, the crisis had a stronger impact on as we increase in terms of income, but when we look at the effects relative to income, the effect vanishes out as we move up the income ladder. And the same occurs when we look at the intervention effect across quantiles, controlling for household size, electric heating, and air conditioning, in which case we find that, again, relative to income, the highest savings were those for the low-income quantile. So overall, my conclusion is that the energy crisis was regressive, whereas the market intervention had progressive effects. Given that this is the symposium of the Spanish Economic Association, I thought it would also be nice to look at heterogeneity not only across income quantiles, but also across locations in Spain. So even though the data is at the zip code level, to make it clearer, I decided to aggregate it at the province level. So what we have here is, for the Spanish provinces, the crisis effect. So those of you who come from Baleares, it seems, I didn't know this, but it seems that in Baleares, there's quite a lot of electric consumption. So this explains why the province that was mostly hit by the energy crisis was Baleares, but not only, also many others. And for that same reason, the province that benefited most by the market intervention was Baleares, as well as many others. And again, we can try to explain these patterns by looking at the differences in the installed equipment across provinces. And we can look at the incidence of electric heating in Spain and the incidence of air conditioning in Spain. And we can broadly see that these patterns very much explain the bill impacts of the crisis and the intervention that we saw in the previous figures. Or we can also revisit our examples of Ponferrada and Elche. So there's quite a lot of electric heating in Elche and almost nothing in Ponferrada, probably because it's so cold there that they heat with gas and therefore not with electric heating. And the same occurs with air conditioning, quite a lot of air conditioning in Elche and none in Ponferrada. So really, the equipment that we have at our households is a very strong predictor of how much electricity we consume, which at the end of the day, together with our consumption patterns, explain why we were more or less affected by the crisis and more or less benefited by the market intervention. So let me summarize some of the main results that I have obtained, and later on let me conclude with some thoughts that this analysis has inspired me going forward in the future. The first one is that the energy crisis gave rise to various distributional effects, both within the wholesale market as well as within the retail market. The energy crisis, by pushing gas prices up and inframarginal rents up, implied that electricity companies made between 26 and 35 million euro more during these 2 year-long crisis. This implied that consumers had to pay for these, and therefore households on average, with all the differences that I have reported across income quantiles, they paid between 350 and 450 euro more on average, despite the intervention. And clearly the low-income households were the ones that were most affected by the crisis when we look at the effects relative to income. The Iberian solution, that is the market intervention that was put in place in the summer of 2022, allowed to reduce those excess profits by approximately 14 billion euro, allowing consumers to save on average on their annual bills 100 euro. And again, in this case, the ones that were most benefited by this market intervention were the low-income households. Therefore, takeaway, crisis was regressive, the intervention was progressive. This was one shock. Gas prices went up, but around the corner, we have many other shocks awaiting there that are going to have important implications on how the electricity market performs and what the distributional effects of those shocks are going to be. A very important shock is the increase in renewable energy in the electricity market, because renewable energies, they have almost zero marginal cost. They are already depressing electricity market prices. Therefore, households are going to start seeing lower electricity prices, and the seasonality of renewables is also going to affect the seasonality of the price changes that we are going to see. So again, depending on how much we consume and when we consume that electricity, we are going to see different effects out of this development. Climate policies are also going to have a very important impact in electricity markets. Things about carbon pricing, which is already in place in power markets, but it's going to be extended for the use of other types of energies, or the greater adoption of electric vehicles. That is going to imply that some households, those that can afford buying an electric vehicle, are going to start consuming more. And the pricing policies in place, whether we pay fixed prices or whether we pay hourly prices, are also going to impact our consumption patterns, whether we cannot care less about when we charge our electric vehicle, or whether we are incentivized to charge our electric vehicle during the mid hours of the day when there's a lot of solar production. Our prices are going to be lower. And climate change is already happening. It's already implying that our temperatures are much higher, our summers are much hotter, and therefore we're going to see a much wider adoption of air conditioning across the country, which again is going to have important distributional implications across the country. What is going to be the compounding effect of all these new developments that we have around the corner? What are going to be the distributional implications across households, taking into account something that I believe is extremely important, which is that these implications will depend on the installed equipment, on the technologies that we adopt, and the technologies that we adopt are again going to be very much related to our income, because not all households can afford having solar panels, and not all households can afford adopting electric vehicles. So I think that the questions surrounding the distributional effects of the energy crisis, both across consumers as firms, as well as across households, they bring in many fascinating questions for research. So let me just conclude inviting people to join this field of economics, energy economics, environmental economics, which I believe not only is extremely important, but also provides a lot of data and many interesting research questions for us economists. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Natalia, for an excellent presentation. I think we have time for a few questions from the floor, if there are some. I think Diego first, and then we have one there.
Sorry, it's okay now? Yeah. So I was wondering about the set of adjustments that you were allowing for. So I didn't understand whether you were keeping consumers with their bill as it was, but just seeing the price for the bill, or whether there's some elasticity of demand that's making consumers adjust their consumption, so maybe they don't switch their air conditioning as often if prices are high and things like that. And whether you're also looking at adjustments on the production side. So to what extent the energy crisis and also the Iberian mechanism has changed, say, shifting towards renewable production, or maybe the beer mechanism slowed it down, to what extent it affected people having self-production of electricity through solar panels and that sort of thing. So the margins of adjustment.
That is an excellent question, Diego. Thank you so much. I take demand as given. So I look at how much households consume, and I do all my analysis taking that as given. But you are absolutely right. Maybe due to the crisis, they consumed less, and I should have taken this into account in my analysis. I didn't do this for simple reasons, time constraints, to start with. Second, the demand elasticity for electricity in the short run is extremely low. So with Marber One and David Robson using hourly demand in Spain, very similarly to what we have done, and looking at hourly price changes, we estimated the demand elasticity in the short run of Spanish households, and we found that it was 0. Okay, no matter what we did, it was 0. This is a short-run elasticity, and this was a short-run elasticity computed during a no-crisis period. But I think there is very good reasons to suspect that probably during the crisis, people were more aware about the price changes, probably there were more budget constraints, and probably the elasticity that really took place during this time was much higher than the one that we estimated. So currently, we are sitting on top of a pile of data, hourly data for 2 million households in Spain, and we want to revisit that analysis that we did to try to understand whether elasticity was higher during this period, whether elasticity differed across households. Probably low-income households had greater incentives to respond more, which would add to these distributional implications. But not only that, you're absolutely right in expecting, as we do, that the price increase also had impacts on the extensive margin, that is, the type of technology that households wanted to adopt. It could be insulation of the household, or it could be adopting solar panels so as not to pay the grid price. We also have this type of data, and we want to understand, again, whether some of the elasticity beyond the short run was channeled through these investments, for instance, in rooftop solar, and there again, try to understand whether it was the high-income households that depicted a stronger elasticity precisely because they could afford bypassing the grid, installing these solar panels. So this is in our agenda. We are working on this, and hopefully in 2, 3, 4 years times, I'll be able to give you the answer. But it's a very well made point.
There was a question over there. Attention. Microphone. There.
Thank you. I found the talk very impressive and overwhelmed by the amount of work and expertise to obtain this kind of simulation on analysis. However, I'm not sure about the distribution issues, that the way you discuss the distribution issues. I don't discuss the calculation, and they are also very interesting, about the prices charged for different categories of household, and all that is nice. But with the technology that you study, there is a huge effect of the move from different kind of production, and that generates huge surplus. And if there were only a few firms, you would have the size of the surplus, producer surpluses, would be the kind of monopolistic surplus, so you surplus. These profits, they go somewhere. Part of the benefits that the firms producing electricities, they are transferred to people who have invested in shares in their banks. So there should be the impact on inequality of the increase in the price of electricity in this period should be much higher than what you see just by looking at the change in prices. People who are able to invest in their bank, in these electricity utilities are going to benefit from it, and the poorest people won't. So I'm worried about this distortion in the distribution analysis.
I think this is out of the scope of this analysis, in which we look at the short to medium run effects of the crisis and the intervention, whether these 25 to 35 billion euro more that firms made in terms of profits, whether those profits are reinvested and have other type of distributional effects. This is clearly out of the scope of this analysis. What this documents is that consumers transfer a large amount of their wealth to electricity companies, and this is what this study is doing, and what this study is doing is also documented how these wealth transfer differ across households. Where there's second round effects, that is going to be the object of another research by others, but certainly not by me.
Question over there. Javier.
Thank you, Natalia, for the nice presentation, and especially for putting numbers to the impact that, however, was quite expected in advance. So to say that the Iberian solution had a positive impact on relative income, or that it reduces profits, was quite expected. The critique that the Iberian solution suffered was not about these likely effects that were expected in advance. But if it was the best possible policy at the moment in terms of the distribution, okay? And then I suggest you to do another kind of exercise for comparison that cannot be difficult to do, I think, okay? It's just to compute the cost in terms of the government budget, and instead of affecting the price of the energy by means of this subsidy, just transfer this income to the lowest part of the income distribution, and then compare what happens in that case with the case you obtained there.
Yes, I'm not. The fact that I said that the impact of the intervention was positive because it reduced inframarginal rents, and it also have positive effects in terms of the distribution, doesn't mean that it was my preferred policy option. I think it's very valuable not only to confirm expected results, but also quantify expected results. To me, it was a surprise to find that the intervention, for instance, saved 100 euro per year on average to households, so that it reduced electricity prices by 32%. I think the quantification is valuable in itself, and I have to say that even though I clearly expected, in line with many other experts, the results of the Iberian solution, I think it's valuable to measure the impacts. It was my preferred solution? No, it was not. Would it have been equivalent to transferring the money of the subsidies that were paid out to the gas-fired plants to households? The answer is no, because the main effect of the Iberian solution was to reduce inframarginal rents. If we have used those subsidies and paid them out to the electricity consumers, the savings would have been much lower, way much lower than 100 euro. Can I tell you how much? No, because I haven't done the quantification. Again, stressing the importance of quantifying the effects. But by far, it would have been much less. Why? Because what really allowed to reduce the bills of the households was the reduction in the inframarginal rents. It was those 14 billion euro that electricity companies reduced their profits. And this was the true impact on the households' electricity bill savings, and not so much the amount that was paid out in form of the subsidies. Because again, let's keep in mind that we paid out subsidies, but would have paid the same amount to those plants, because we would have paid higher prices to those plants. I think it's important that we analyze the Iberian solution, not because it was something that happened, not because it was our preferred solution, but because we have to obtain lessons from what has happened to design electricity markets in the future. And by the way, probably you've read that the European Parliament has reached a final agreement today as to the electricity market reform in the future. And the solution that the Council, the European Commission and the Parliament have given to this problem has been to allow governments to cap electricity bills at times of crisis, and therefore would not avoid the increase in the inframarginal rents of the producers. That is, if I were to compare two options on the table, which is the one that has been agreed and the Iberian solution reduces inframarginal rents. The new agreement does not, and for that matter, even though the Iberian solution is not my preferred option, I still prefer it over the final agreement that has been reached.
Any more questions from the floor? I have a couple of remarks, actually, if I may. One is that it is quite remarkable that in these markets where everything seems extremely inelastic in the short run, probably it's elastic in the very long run, there's so much substitution in the medium run, both in production and in consumption. I mean, the gas arrived, the pipelines changed direction, on the production side, on the consumer side, consumers managed to actually adjust to. So I think it's a bit outside your work, and I think in a way you are assuming most elasticities are given. But I think it would be very nice, because to me it's very subtle. It's very, very many margins that adjust to make sure that everyone is consuming in the last minute. So I think that's a remark that I think that would be a great avenue for research.
I think it's central. And what we are learning, and again, it's not very surprising, it is expected, that the elasticity mainly, and I would say only, comes through changes in the technology. In the short run, we are very much constrained by the equipment that we have. If we have electric heating and we have to heat our homes, maybe we can increase or reduce the temperature a little bit, but we have to heat our homes. So the effect really comes through the technology adoption, and there again, income matters a lot. So in another paper that I have with Marve Want and co-authors, we look at the distributional effects of charging consumers fixed prices or hourly prices. And what we find is that the distributional consequences of that are much stronger when we endogenize technology adoption. In that case, technology adoption also comes through smart meters or solar panels or electric vehicles and so on and so forth. And there we find that when we endogenize technology adoption, the distributional implications of the shift are much stronger and more adverse. This is to say, we have to keep in mind that technology adoption is endogenous and very much varies across the income ladder. And to me, this is one of the most challenging issues for research, as well as it's very important from a policy perspective.
And just one final remark relative also to Javier's comment. I think when we have the whole problem as economists, we figure out better ways or more efficient ways to do things. We could tax that lump sum of profits and give it to the poorest people. But I think there are political constraints, and things like the Iberian solution is like, where can we have a simple, easy to sell solution that gets us 3/4 of the way of the optimal solution without much change. And I mean, to me, that's something that it seems that it's somewhere in the room, and we should definitely mark it.
Absolutely. I think we often think of the first best, but we have to think of a second best that is the political feasible option, and probably in that case it was the only political feasible option in place. And again, whether it was the first best or not, at least we can now assess and quantify and evaluate the implications that these had. And by the way, I'm only quantifying the direct implications, but clearly these had implications on inflation. Inflation had distributional consequences and so on. So if anything, I would very keen on having others looking at the indirect implications that it had, endogenizing and taking into account the general equilibrium effects when we put inflation and other economic variables into account. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Natalia, once again for an excellent session. It's time for lunch. which is, believe in the other building in the same place that we had our coffee break before. See you there.